The very first transaction I ever did with express purpose of buying something for investment was a fourplex by Illinois State University. It just so happened in looking through all the stuff that was available for sale, one of them was this small multi, and that's the one that worked, and that's the one that I bought. And I realized that, oh my gosh, one transaction, immediate scale, this is the thing that deserves my attention.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Alex Schloe here with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. Today's episode was with my new friend, Mandy McAllister. This episode was amazing, and you will definitely take away from how humble and how giving she is in terms of her time and her knowledge. This episode was amazing. We talked about multiple different things in this podcast that can change your life. That is the power of community in an abundance mindset, how you can buy small multifamily and commercial multifamily properties. We talked about small business acquisitions. Mandy just recently closed on a 7-bay car wash near Chicago. We talk about GoBundance for Women. GoBundance for Women is an absolutely incredible organization. So if you are a woman who is listening to this podcast and you're thinking about how can I surround myself with like-minded individuals, like-minded women who are focused on health, wealth, changing lives, and financial freedom, GoBundance for Women is for you. Be sure to listen through the podcast so you can learn a little bit more about GoBundance for Women and how you could join. This episode was so much fun, and I really enjoyed it. I know you will gain a lot of value from it as well. If you learned something from this podcast, leave us a 5-star rating and review on the platform of your choice. And without any further ado, let's get started with today's episode with Mandy McAllister. McAllister, welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. So glad to have you on the show today. How are you?
I am living the dream. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm really glad to have you on the show. You were recommended by multiple people, including Karen. It was super great to have you on the podcast. Do you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to. I grew up a farm kid in small town, central Illinois, and thought I was going to go to med school. And then actually had a conversation 3 years into my chemistry undergrad with a doctor who was, I guess, upset being on call. And he said, you better love medicine because you're going to be a slave to this pager. And that's when I chose to switch to the business school. But a real punchline to my life is I ended up ascending the medical device ladder to end up on call with med device sales. That's when I decided to really lean into buying small apartment buildings to get myself out of the day-to-day on-call stuff. That's super high level how I got where I am now, where I get to lead a group called GoBundance Women. We are the tribe of healthy, wealthy, generous women who choose to lead epic lives. Really a bunch of women who get together who lift each other up and really go do big stuff in all areas of life.
GoBundance is such an incredible organization and really excited to hit on that a little bit more. What kind of led to the medical device sales, if you don't mind me asking? I know didn't want to be on call as a doctor, and you probably made the right decision going to business school. But what led to medical device sales for you?
I had kind of this sciencey brain and a business degree. And then I ended up doing a master's degree in economics. And my dad is a farmer, plus economics degree, plus lives in Chicago equals Chicago Board of Trade. I ended up working there for a number of years. And it seemed pretty obvious once I realized kind of how archaic the exchange was that it was going to go very computer. I decided to go where the money was. And it felt like med device sales, if I wasn't going to be directly in medicine, being medical adjacent would help get me there. At about 25 years old, I leaned into med device sales, and that's where I spent the bulk of my career.
I have a friend who sold medical devices, and it was really quite lucrative, but I think he worked a lot more than some of the docs, to be completely honest. And he sold some devices more in the surgical subspecialty space. And he was always scrubbed into the OR and participating in these surgeries with the surgeons, and he worked just as much. It's a tough business to be in for sure, but it was definitely quite lucrative. And he kind of did a similar path to you where he pivoted away from that now and is no longer selling medical devices, but it was a great opportunity for him. And he learned a lot of great skills with sales and networking, which of course are so important for everything investment related. Did you feel like that kind of gave you a good foundation for the future direction your life took after medical device sales?
The building of relationships is so incredibly important. And I think really the the primary takeaway is if you're playing in a sandbox, you might try to show up as smarter than you are. And especially if you're a device rep showing up to physicians, you might try to use words that don't make a ton of sense. But just like Einstein said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it enough. And that idea moving into the commercial real estate space and buying 100+ unit properties, or in some cases, everybody's just showing up as people. And if you are fully understanding what you're doing, you can explain it simply.
I really believe relationships are key, and good relationships can really expedite your investing journey exponentially. And that's what it's all about. If there's one skill that's most important, it's figuring out relationships. And correct me if I'm wrong, in the real estate space, I feel like everyone kind of thinks like maybe there's a scarcity mindset, but there's really not. Like in my experience, it's really this abundance mindset. There's plenty of deals for everybody. Maybe it's just the communities that we're in, those folks really have that abundance mindset and are willing to lift people up. And I think you got to be willing to give more than you take. And
I say a lot that you get two arms for a reason, one to pull yourself up and one to pull other people up with you. And just a thing I've noticed time and time again is that kind of scarcity zero-sum game. Anyone who is fully succeeding understands that there's enough win to go around, and that's when collaboration happens and not scarcity.
Yeah, you grow just so much faster. Completely agree. I like the two arm saying. That's really great. I'm going to steal that going forward. How did you get into real estate investing?
So actually in undergrad, I was at a party and standing on the porch, my friend was explaining to me that this house she lived in, her dad bought it, and that she rented out the rooms to our friends. And I thought, oh my God, and you get to keep that money? That's the best idea I've ever heard in my whole life. I'm doing this. I was 19 years old when the seed was planted of must be real estate investor, but I followed all the right path. I was the straight A student. I was the Division I athlete. I did the master's degree. I went and did all of the things that you're supposed to do following the book. And then at some point, it was right around when my son was born in 2016, right before then, 2015, that I realized, oh, wait, you only get one go round of this thing, that taking the plunge analysis. The people who get really ridiculously successful in life are willing to make mistakes and fail forward. And how can I make a little bet to fail forward so I don't ruin this whole thing? But it was a real identity shift that I needed to be perfect and wait my turn. That was significant in my life.
Thanks for sharing that. I feel like that's something a lot of us struggle with, especially in medicine, as we're so used to being perfectionists and overachievers and working so hard. Everything for us is kind of planned out up until we graduate residency. In terms of undergrad and med school and residency, you come out as an attending and you're like, wow, this is just so much different. My work hours are different. And now I'm making a lot more money. Something to keep in mind is that kind of continuum as we're going. And then we hit the real world and you're like, whoa, it's game time now. I do only have one shot at this.
One more thing that really helped this analysis paralysis, because I think you're spot on, that many physicians, you make a decision at 18 years old that this is the path I'm on and I'm not getting off of it. And you recommit to this cycle of things because you put all this work in before, especially with the idea of making an investment and needing to be willing to have that screw up and pivot. There was a book that was kind of all the rage in GoBundance Women, and we actually give it to our members, called The Psychology of Money. My primary takeaway from that was you don't need to be perfect to win. You need to be reasonable enough. And this speaks directly to medicine, like risk reward. And then what is reasonable enough, and trying to think through whatever move it is that I want to make.
Physicians make such good investors if they just learn the basics. And I talk to people all the time and they're like, how hard is it to get involved in real estate investing? And I'm like, way easier than it is to go into medical school and take care of patients. It's so much easier. And it can even be algorithmic. And a lot of medicine is algorithmic, and real estate can be the same way. And you have your KPIs that you just work through, and you get leads and you send out offers and you get deals. It's a pretty simple framework. But a lot of times we suffer with that imposter syndrome, or at least the fear of taking imperfect action.
Oh my gosh. I have this perfect straight line story around this because I was helping this woman get into multifamily, who she was a PA in neurosurgery at the University of Chicago. Yeah. She's just like, oh, but Mandy, what if I talk to a broker and I say something that's dumb? And I'm like, listen, is there anyone in your day job that you admire their intellect? And she's like, oh yeah, Dr. So-and-so is doing this novel thing, whatever. And she can name like 5 people that are doing this cutting edge stuff, right? And I'm like, okay, now let's back up. How many real estate agents do you really admire their intellect? Can you name as many as you just did in the people you work with day to day? Probably not. Like, understand the sandbox you're playing in. And if you are able to understand the processes of the human body in a way to become a physician, you absolutely can understand the processes of net operating income.
Yeah, that's right. And you can surround yourself with the network of people who are doing it, who are using their arm to pull you back up and help you along the journey. And there's a lot of support. That's what I love so much about community. I'm in a mastermind community. It's completely changed my life. I've met amazing people and have invested in so many more deals than I ever would have. It's called the War Room for military folks. Yeah. It's been a game changer. And part of it is because it gives you the confidence. You're surrounded by like-minded people, and it gives you the confidence to take the leap and get started, which is the hardest part. I think that really information is out there. You can get the information. It's the implementation and the accountability that's often the hard part, which is something that I think GoBundance does so well. That's what this mastermind does really well that I'm a part of, is you have that support system, but you also have the accountability. You also have the goals that you're working through. And that is so important to help alleviate the stress that a physician may feel in terms of investing.
I totally agree. And to add to it, one of the most annoying things about the human psyche is that you don't think you can do something until you see that it can be done. It's the whole Roger Bannister 4-minute mile. And to add to that too, you don't necessarily think that that can happen for somebody like you until you see somebody like you who's done it, which is why some of these masterminds that are very precise avatars end up being very helpful. I know a woman who owns an island, and I am from a town of 800 people in baled hay. It's all possible in my brain now because I've seen how it's happened.
Right. Exactly. And then you're so much more likely to be able to achieve something beyond what you ever could because you experience that. It's the same thing for us when we're learning different procedures and so forth. Like, oh, cool, you can read it in a textbook, but when you go out and actually do it, and then you can continue going forward. You mentioned too, Mandy, that you were a D1 athlete. What sport did you play?
Volleyball.
Nice.
I weaseled my way onto the staff of my bonus daughter's freshman team. I'm very excited I get to coach her too.
That's awesome. I have a 3.5-year-old who just started T-ball. I was a big baseball player growing up. He just started T-ball, and I really wanted to coach him. And now I'm very grateful that I'm not, because it's like herding cats. It's funny. He's so much like me. And I think our kids just take so many personalities and maybe good and bad from us. I see myself in him so much. To be honest, I'm a little bit stubborn. And my wife would say I'm a lot stubborn, but I see him out there and I'll tell him to do something on the baseball field and then he won't do it. Then his coach will tell him the exact same thing and then he does it and it works. And it's like this novel idea that he's never heard before. It just cracks me up. Kids are the best.
They are here to teach us something.
Oh, yeah. Well, small multifamilies or multifamily commercial deals and so forth. How did you get involved in that? I know you mentioned the exposure to house hacking in undergrad and that seed was planted, but how did that seed start to grow?
The very first transaction I ever did with express purpose of buying something for investment was a fourplex by Illinois State University. It just so happened in looking through all the stuff that was available for sale, one of them was this small multi, and that's the one that worked, and that's the one that I bought. And I realized that, oh my gosh, one transaction, immediate scale, this is the thing that deserves my attention. I need to add a 0 to the end of that and really dive into multifamily. As I ended up diving deeper down that rabbit hole, I realized that the lending that you can get on these properties is so much more potential than the smaller stuff. If you're willing to go big enough, you can get agency debt backed by the government that is non-recourse, which in my opinion is how the rich get richer. If you've got a significant amount of money to deploy, then you can absolutely go put that into something that will fund your retirement in an easy, straightforward, fast sort of a way.
When you're talking about some of these deals, do you feel like it was significantly more difficult to buy some larger multifamily properties as it was to buy smaller ones?
I am a person who likes to learn by starting small. I started with the fourplex. That was something that I wanted to make mistakes and fail forward, especially because I came from this school of scared to make a mistake. I wanted the first mistakes to be small. As I've built this confidence that I can trust my own judgment, I'm realizing that it is exactly the same. It's not harder, it's just more. A thing that I say a lot as we're getting into underwriting when I'm helping people get into this is it is not harder to look at the numbers for a multifamily. It's just more because there are more doors and a couple more moving parts. So if you're capable of the first one, you're absolutely capable of the second one.
What do you like about multifamily properties?
Coming from an economics background, knowing that the debt is really the primary asset and thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can live your whole life, Alex, without owning a Bitcoin. You cannot live your whole life without a roof over your head. Every single human in the 7 billion population that we've got. If I want to buy something where someone will need it in 30 years, owning a place for someone to live, that is probably a very, very good bet. Another book by the same guy who wrote The Psychology of Money, I'm going to butcher it, but it's about what is going to be the same in the future. This Morgan Housel. It's a Warren Buffett idea that instead of trying to figure out what's going to change, figure out what's going to be the same. And I think housing is absolutely going to be the same. One kind of more high level thing is if you want to reach financial freedom with real estate and you're choosing single family and you need $20,000 a month cash flow, you got to be right like 300 times. If you're going to buy an apartment building, you got to be right like twice, So if you get really good at decision making, then you can move forward faster with just the one or two right decisions.
I love that. The economies of scale with multifamily is incredible. The Schloes are feeling that hard right now. We have a long-term rental from a prior duty station in Florida, and the tenant just moved out, and our property manager called us and she's like, I am so sorry to tell you this, but your house is just completely destroyed. She sent us pictures. It is just a wreck. All the carpets like ripped to shreds, the trim work, all kind. It is just a nightmare. There were a couple unfortunate things that we were not alerted to potential problems earlier, and it might have been different. But I say all that to say that we're looking at probably putting $12,000 back in to this house, and our cash flow for the last year was $12,000. But it's just really hard with single families when you can have one significant hit like this, and there goes your cash flow for the whole year. But that's something that I tell folks to keep in mind as well, of like, hey, if you're going to do single families, especially as a long-term rental, like you mentioned, it's really hard to cash flow right now with interest rates how they are. And then you have a significant event like this and it wipes it all out for an entire year. That's where I love multifamily and economies of scale and so forth as well.
I think the management changes so significantly as well, even within levels of multifamily, because the sixplex, the management is very much like single family homes. You got to call Joe for doing the lawn, and Stephanie is the person in charge of leasing up. You've probably got a list of 30 people that you need to know how to do business within this property management firm. But on the 38, on the 53, on the 104 I own, I have one name and one person who is responsible for KPIs. And they report back to me and my partners once per month on a 30-minute call. There is some level of scale where gurus will tell you got to buy 100 units or more to be able to afford this. Well, in my experience, if you can afford someone partially, not Monday through Friday, but like maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then you're going to be able to achieve that same level of one person with their eyes on the ball, making sure that it's running well.
That's great. What do you feel like kind of is that sweet spot in terms of unit count for what you mentioned here with the property managers?
I think what matters more than unit count is number of dollars. Because if you have a 100 unit that has $300 rents, you're probably going to have trouble finding a way to pay someone. But if you have $4,000 rents on a 10-plex, you might be able to do it. We have found success with that on a 38-unit property with an average rent of about $800. It's kind of a sliding scale, and it's all what you can negotiate with that property manager.
Where do you guys tend to invest, Mandy?
One thing that I think is super important that I dive into a lot with anybody I'm working on is I feel like you can be an expert on one market. You need to know that that rent is going to work on that side of the street and not over there. What I chose as my market, I wanted to be able to get down and back by dinner. And I wanted it to be hugely growth oriented in terms of jobs and GDP and just all things industry. And for me, from Chicago, it ain't Chicago, I ended up investing in Indianapolis, actually where my little brother is a physician and an ED. So a nice excuse to go see him and the kids as well.
What are some things that kind of drew you towards the Indianapolis market?
I dive super deep. You got to figure out what market works for you and become that expert. The big three that I talk about a lot are, and free data exists out the wazoo for around this. You want to know that you're going to be able to rent that property out in 30 years. And how do you figure that out? Number one, is the population growing? Are people moving into this market such that they will likely continue to? Again, not the case in Chicago. It has shrunk in size year over year for the last 10 years. It is the case in Indianapolis. Two, you want to make sure that new jobs are coming into town. And that's another easy thing that you can look up for free on the internet. And then GDP, like how much are these people being paid? Is that growing? So end of the day, what you're trying to prove to yourself and trust your own judgment is, will I be able to rent this out in 30 years?
I like that. That's an easy, kind of simple concept to just think through, okay, what's going to contribute to that and how can I ensure success in that market? Indianapolis is a great market. I definitely know a lot of folks who invest there and do really quite well. Do you feel like you're really just going to stick only to Indianapolis going forward? Or it's hard with all the shiny objects, especially in the community that you work in. I'm sure you get exposure to a lot of different opportunities.
Multifamily will always be my end game. It is absolutely my end game. With the tick up in interest rates, the fastest ever in the history of the world, we're not finding price discovery in multifamily. One thing in watching the people way more successful than me in GoBundance, we actually do a call where someone fully dissects how they got to a $10 million or $100 million net worth, because sometimes what got you here won't get you there. The thing that I've learned, if I can't do a multifamily deal, because they're not like as prolific now, you got to kiss 1,000 frogs to find one prince. I'm waiting for what I think my crystal ball is saying, that Q2 of 2025, we're going to start to see a little bit more loosening in that deal flow stuff. Instead of sitting on my hands, because I'm not a sit on your hands kind of girl, I'm learning from those people that we dissect their $100 million net worth and how they got there. It's largely a business interest that gets you there. Because if you think of, if I'm going to buy an apartment building at a 4 cap, value is NOI over cap, 4 cap, I want $1 of NOI, it's going to cost me $25 to buy it. But a car wash will cost me 3x EBITDA. So $3 for $1 cash flow instead of 25. What I've done recently, shiny penny, is I bought a car wash that I'm scaling up that footprint so that we can have a full-time operator working on it, in the same way that I've learned my property managers can handle one person's eyes on the ball, is what makes it run really well.
Let's talk about that a bit more, the car washes, if you don't mind, because small business acquisition, I agree with you, is a great way to increase your net worth. The more I've learned about it and the more I've listened to it, I feel the same way as you have, like that you can probably be a low multimillionaire with just real estate, but you got to have that business aspect to jump higher. What do you like about small business acquisition that you haven't already mentioned, and why car washes?
I like to back into stuff. I had this criteria buying my first apartment building that I wanted it within 2 hours. I wanted something that I can increase the value or the rent in a very easy way. For this acquisition, I wanted something with proximity to me, because I bought a motel a couple years ago. It's 6 hours away. It's very difficult to troubleshoot problems. I wanted it close. I wanted something with as few employees as possible. What that then meant was something like a laundromat or a car wash. And I wanted something with a real estate heavy play, because I had 1031 exchange dollars and I wanted the depreciation piece associated with it. That's how I got to those two assets. And then I just underwrote as many of them as I could find. It turned out that the proximity to me of the laundromats was they were in places that were rented, and I didn't have any control over the way things looked on the outside. Because the thing I learned from apartment buildings is, if you improve how things look on the outside, people don't push back necessarily on a little bit of an uptick in rent. If I wanted to increase my rates of the car wash, I needed to make some things pretty, and then they would anticipate that that was coming. So I wanted to apply that. I ended up with a car wash about 20 minutes away from me. It's 7 bays. 5 of them are self-serve. 2 are you drive your car in and it's an in-bay automatic. We're putting in place a structure that we've already installed the hardware to be able to do a subscription-based situation on those in-bay automatics. But a thing that I've really learned on this car wash play is the self-service bays. There's a need. If you work in landscaping and you have a truck, you can't go through one of those tunnels like you probably take your car through. You can't take your truck through that tunnel. You got to do it yourself.
We use the self-service bay all the time. We have a camper. After we go camping, we'll take it through there and we're like, this is great. And so yeah, definitely a need for them, and will always be a need for the self-service bays. I feel like the two kind of big introductions to small business acquisitions, the car washes and laundromats, people love them and the cash flow is great. Less employment or less employees for those. So 7 bays, that's really cool. And the subscription model is awesome. I was listening to another podcast, Action Academy podcast, with my buddy Brian Lubin, and they talk a lot about small business acquisitions and just how every dollar that you earn on recurring revenue is worth 3 times as much when you go to sell the business in the future. He always mentions like, hey, you have to think about how can I get annual recurring revenue into the business, and what a cool way to do that with the subscription model. What's been some difficulties with maybe finding the car wash or operating and owning the car wash?
I ended up just finding this car wash on Biz by Sell. That is how I got connected to the seller. So nothing earth shattering there. However, when it came to starting to run that business, I thought I had done this incredible job negotiating 6 months of training and oh my gosh, this is going to be wonderful. Well, come to find out, the guy who owned it before had an operator, had a man that worked on it as his job, but that man retired to Wisconsin. And that's the reason that our guy wanted to sell. The training we got was from the guy who didn't really work in the business. So that was talk about failing forward. We figured out a number of things and making sure that you have someone handling the day-to-day that is fluent in the language of it. I would not buy a business that did that again. That was a significant mistake that I made. But I know a lot about pumps now that I never thought that I would know. Buying a business is so much more important to have that operator in place than just buying an apartment building.
The car wash that you currently own, does that offer enough cash flow for you to hire an operator now or in the future?
Potentially in the future, but a thing that I learned from having a sixplex, you need enough revenue to be able to afford that person. My goal is to acquire a couple more, and then we're going to have enough top line revenue to afford that person who's going to come in and really serve as that full-time operator. But we're not there yet. The way that I've operated in growing anything is I know that I learn better by doing. You got to see one and you got to do one. Being in it and doing it is the way that I really learn fastest. I don't want to just have the operator doing everything right from the jump because I need to know what I'm talking about.
I think it's great to spend the time in the trenches, and then down the road when you sell, you're going to actually be helpful for training the next person than the seller was for you. If you don't mind, we haven't really talked about business buying too much on this podcast. Do you mind just kind of giving a brief overview? If someone's listening to this and they're thinking, hey, I want to buy a laundromat or I want to buy a car wash or some other small business, do you mind kind of walking through briefly what that process would look like in terms of talking to a broker and finding the deals and those sorts of things? Do you mind hitting on that?
Sure, of course. Just like LoopNet, if you're going to start trying to underwrite larger apartment buildings, LoopNet is a great place to go download stuff to be able to start downloading and get some reps in, because it's those reps that really help you trust your own judgment. If you want to do that on the business buying side, BizBuySell, BizBuySell, it's owned by the same CoStar parent company as LoopNet. That will help you kind of get your feet wet. But the valuation of apartment buildings or anything commercial real estate, it's that value equals NOI over cap rate. The valuation of a business is a multiple of EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So basically, if you get financials from a business, like that's all it is. You're working through the financials and proving how truthful is this. One thing that I would recommend in due diligence is making sure that whatever profit and loss statement you get matches bank accounts, because that will be a way to prove what's real is real. And especially these cash related businesses, some sellers might tell you, oh, yes, top line $110,000, but it really brings in 190. So you can only get the loan on what is true on paper. Make sure as a negotiating point that you're pointing out that you can only get the loan and therefore only pay a price that's associated with that NOI or that EBITDA. Mm-hmm. One thing that I'll say in terms of businesses, that multiple, you can just go down the Google rabbit hole and look for what an appropriate multiple of EBITDA each business has. These are published from time to time and pretty easy to find. What I found on car washes was roughly 3.8x EBITDA is what would help you value a car wash.
Thanks for the crash course there. Are there any other businesses that you're interested in potentially pursuing going forward?
I'm looking to go an inch wide and a mile deep. When it comes to this multiple of EBITDA, another thing to keep in mind is once you've achieved a threshold of, call it $5 million EBITDA, that valuation becomes a lot more attractive to private equity. That multiple might go from a 3x EBITDA to a 10x EBITDA. That roll-up strategy, being able to bring one big business with a ton of standard operating procedures into a saleable asset, would make a lot of money on that roll-up.
And are you able to write off your active income from the car wash against your multifamily properties that you own?
Yes and no. We were pretty careful to silo the building into one LLC ownership and the business into another LLC ownership. The building is the primary portion of what it is that we own. And that LLC is the one that has the opportunity to take the passive depreciation. And I, as a real estate professional, am able to make use of that.
What a great perk, real estate professional status. I keep telling my wife she's got to do it. Mandy, I'd love to talk a bit more about GoBundance Women. How did you get involved with GoBundance, and how did that lead to ultimately the creation of GoBundance Women?
So in about 2017, I was at a multifamily event and the after hours networking. I met this guy who was talking about, I just joined this thing. And yes, it's about financial freedom, but it's about so much more than that. How connected are your relationships? Are you giving back in a way that feels awesome? How is your health? And I thought, oh my God, I need these people. How do I join? And at that point in time, it was just a men's club. The nature of how it started was these 4 guys started doing this bucket list stuff together and accountability. And they grew because their willingness to go vulnerable in things about relationships and stuff it was better if it was just men in the room. And they looked up after about 1,000 members and realized, oh, wait, we're not serving women. So in 2020, when they started the women's division, I had an opportunity to join as a member because what I was missing was people who looked like me dreaming big. And being the female breadwinner is a different thing that can be difficult to navigate at some points. Being around other people that were doing stuff like me made me not feel crazy and made me feel like I could go further faster. At the end of 2022, the guys who started the men's side wanted this to have an opportunity to be for women by women. And then I, along with 2 other women, stepped up to lead the women's division. About 2 years now, we've had the opportunity to really make the tweaks that make this feel really incredibly special. We are committed to women who are hungry for growth in all directions. And yes, financial freedom matters, but it's about so much more than that. And are you willing to show up and give and receive at the same time?
Yeah.
That is the woman that we serve. And we have seen a tremendous amount of success and blessings that have come from it.
Right back to that abundance mindset that we talked about earlier, which makes sense with GoBundance. Well, if someone is interested in GoBundance for women and joining that, are there specific requirements that are needed or application process, or what does that look like? And what, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about what does it actually look like if you were to join?
Happy to. The process to join, if you check out our website, it's gobundancewomen.com. There's an application on our website. If you want to talk to me directly about it first, shoot me an email, mandy@mandymcallister.com. We'll make sure you get that for the show notes. But the woman we serve best, there is an income requirement that you need to be an accredited investor in order to join GoBundance Women, because your problems with investing are different if you're accredited $1 million net worth than if you're just starting out. So we want to make sure that we're serving the women that we can really lift up in a big way. After an application, you'll have a conversation with either me or someone else on our team in leadership, and make sure that it's a fit in both directions, because we're very careful that we're bringing in women who are hungry for growth in the right way and that their energy kind of matches our collective genius, because we're very certain that we are only as good as our next right member, and we make sure to vet that out. So if you're interested, shoot me an email, apply on our website, mention that you heard us here, and I'll reach out and have a full conversation.
We'll be sure to include email and contact information in the website to show notes as well if folks are interested. I'm definitely more familiar with GoBundance for men, but I've never heard anything bad. I've never heard anybody say like, oh man, this was a big mistake. It's always been just such high praises for GoBundance. So I'm sure it is the same way for you. And I know a few folks who are in GoBundance for women, they absolutely love it. It's an incredible thing that you guys are doing. Kind of hitting on female investors. I did want to talk about this because I feel like females are scared, maybe not scared to invest, but they have a little bit more imposter syndrome than males. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? Or what do you feel like is some ways, other than surrounding yourself with an incredible network of females who are crushing it, what do you feel like are some ways to kind of overcome that imposter syndrome in terms of getting started investing as a female investor?
I think it's completely true. If you haven't seen the TED Talk by the woman who started coding for girls, it's about how girls are taught to be perfect and boys are taught to be brave. She has a follow-up book on the subject. Because if you think about the chores that girls are given, it's right here next to me, fold the laundry, and a boy, go mow the lawn. It's something that I'm trying to examine and the chores that I give in my house to the 3 kids. But end of the day, if you have been taught to be perfect and you have found success and love and praise having been the straight A student who has made it through med school and subspecialized and so on and so forth, then you absolutely are going to have a difficult time being willing to go down the bravery vein. because you have gotten such rewards being perfect. The regaming of things for me personally, and then I've seen time and time again, it's a kind of a Stoic philosophy principle that how do you figure out the actual worst case scenario of the thing that you are trying to do? Not, I want to buy an apartment complex and, oh, what if a toilet breaks and what if the gate doesn't open? Those things are going to happen. You are signing up to fix problems if you are signing up to be an investor. But the absolute worst case scenario might be that you can't afford the loan payment and you have to give that property back. How do you think about that absolute worst case scenario and then mitigate that risk and figure out how to make friends and dance and be comfortable with that worst case scenario and the work that you've done to make sure that it doesn't happen? And that has really helped me move forward into the stuff that I didn't stop being scared. I just was scared and did it anyway.
A lot of times in the financial freedom circle or financial independence circle, folks are very scared about that, especially for physicians. If you look at it, for us, our biggest fears are present day reality, probably. If we achieved financial freedom and then something happened and we needed to go back to work as a doctor, like we're already doing that. Your biggest fear is your present day reality from that perspective. And we kind of get hung up on that from time to time. But I truly believe that some degree of financial freedom can help doctors provide better patient care. It can give us some more freedom and go from there.
I could not agree with that more. And one more kind of mindset hack that I put into place in 2021 as I had hit this number that I needed to see to leave my W-2. I actually made a little calculator to help me figure out what that was, and I'll give it to you to put in the show notes if anybody's interested. But I hit the number, and I was ready to leave medical device sales. I was newly divorced, single mom, full custody. I'm going to be homeless and penniless and under a bridge, and this isn't going to work. And what am I thinking? Even the people who love me are saying I'm being irresponsible because they love me and they're trying to keep me safe. And I'm leaving a $200,000 a year job to go chase my dreams. Yes, I see how that could look irresponsible to them. But a thing that I know for sure is that I was good enough at medical device sales that I could pick up a phone, and I had such strong relationships that I could get a job in 2 weeks if I needed a job. The way I chose to look at it, to remove some of that like finality, was I'm treating this like a 12-month experiment. If this feels awesome 12 months from today, then I'm going to keep doing it. If it doesn't, then I go find that job. And it's the present day reality. It's no different. I got this opportunity to bet on myself because another thought experiment I do is I think about Mandy 20 years from now. And would she be more upset that I tried and failed? Or would she be more upset that I didn't try at all? I have a conversation with her pretty frequently, and she usually points me in the right direction.
Yeah, those are great mindset hacks to use for sure. Do you mind me asking, when did you leave the medical device sales game and bet on yourself?
August 1st, 2021.
Okay. What are your thoughts? It's been over 12 months by a long shot. How do you feel looking back?
It's a thing I wish that I would have done a significant time ago. It's a different type of stress. Like, it's not without stress, but it's something that I really feel like I'm building a foundation that I get to grow on top of. And especially coming from a sales background, you start from scratch every single year. And now when I build something, I'm building on top of it. And I'm leaving this like much larger legacy than I would have otherwise.
That's so awesome. Mandy, I want to be respectful of your time. And I know you got a big trip coming up here soon, which is exciting. Is there anything else we didn't hit on or anything else you'd like to touch base on before we wrap things up?
The only way to move forward, if you are an analysis paralysis person, which I was from the age of 19 to the age of 35, you don't know what you're capable of until you start trying and you get comfortable with it. You're going to screw up. I promise you're going to screw up. But are you being reasonable enough and around the people who are going to encourage you to move in the right direction? If you're doing nothing else, you take nothing else away. That is my hope.
That's a great way to wrap things up. Mandy, how can folks reach out to you if they want to know more, want to find out more about joining Abundance? You mentioned your email earlier, which we'll put in the show notes, but anything else you'd like to share?
Sure. My website, mandymcallister.com, is the catch-all for everything I do. You'll find links to GoBundance and that small multis course that's launching here soon.
Mandy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
This was so fun. Thank you so much.
With that, it's been Mandy McAllister and Dr. Alex Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties podcast. Signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews. and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.